Hey Sharon, can you hear us?
You're on mute. There you go. Say hello,
Yes.
Sharon.
Yes. Hello. Hi. It's me.
Hi, great. Okay, we
Audio is
got
working.
folks settling into the room here, so a few more minutes. What I'll do is just do a small little intro and let people know that I'm facilitating in this room, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, Arlene.
They can't see you in Cana Hall. If you don't have a table with like a pen and little sheets of paper, if you want to just make sure you grab one and bring to your table.
Sharon, while Arlene is setting up Cana Hall, do you have any questions before we begin?
I don't think so. I'm just gonna flow with what we got going on here. Okay.
Well, so I've heard your flow is pretty exceptional, so
What? Oh, I don't know about all
whatever happens
that.
will be great.
I don't know about all of that. So. Are we praying? Is there a prayer beforehand here?
I'm going to do a grounding practice for everyone.
Okay. That's cool. Justine, do I need my camera on the full time, even during your grounding activity, or?
If you would like to turn off your camera for that, that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
And if you are reading a section, that'd be wonderful if it could stay on, and when you're responding to questions.
Okay, sure.
But you can turn it off now if you'd like before we begin.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead. Welcome everybody to Black History Month presentation called They Got Daddy, and it's a book talk from one of our coworkers, Sharon Tubbs at Health Visions Fort Wayne. I'm actually going to be here helping to moderate here in the room, and then Justine and Sharon are both. Hello. I'm going to be here in the room helping to to facilitate the sessions. And just please make sure, like, if at your desk there's a pen and a piece of paper, because there's going to be a small activity as a part of the book talk that we want you all to participate in. And so I'm going to turn it over to Justine.
Thanks, Arlene. Welcome, everyone. So good to see you. I know many of you have gathered in Cana Hall at the center in Donaldson, and then we have online attendance as well. So I just want to name that, and much gratitude to those who have shown up today in honor of Sharon, her book, the collective work of our coworkers. So welcome. We're going to be together for about 55 minutes today. And the kind of run through of the event, Sharon and I are just going to have a chit chat, and then the pieces of paper that Arlene referenced on the tables in person are, if you have questions, you can also raise your hand and Arlene will come to you. And then at the end, we'll do a reflection. For those of you who are joining via Zoom, you are welcome to do it in the Q&A or chat, whatever kind of question you have access to. And first, I kind of just want to start with grounding us into this space and place. So, welcome, and we're so glad you're with us today. The opening practice is called the 200-year present, and I've modified it a bit from John Paul Lederach and Elise Boulding. I just want to name, I first heard it, bringing in legacy from nuns and nuns. So find a comfortable position, and if you feel safe to do, close your eyes. Again, find a comfortable position, however that feels right for your body, and if you feel safe to do so, close your eyes. Go back in your memory to when you were a very young child. And remember the lap that you sat on. The people who may have stroked your face or tousled your hair, who may have held your hand when you took your first steps. But don't just remember any person. Try to remember the oldest person that you would have known at your youngest age. Now, when you have that person's face, maybe their hand, the softness of that touch, the bigness of that lap in your mind, I want you to think approximately of what year or decade might that person have been born. Now, I want you to go to your present community, and I want you to think of the face and the small hand of the youngest child that you know from your meaningful relationships. So again, the youngest child that you have a relationship with. Gather that young child's face in your mind. When you have that person's face in mind, imagine that person as an elder enjoying their children. Imagine that person, a very old elder, enjoying their great-great-grandchildren, if they're so fortunate. Imagine the decade they might live to see as the generations after them come. That's your 200-year present, the birthday of those who have held, molded, and shaped you, and the date out at which those who are the youngest you know, molded and shaped, will live. These are the lives that have touched you and you have touched. And so we invite that legacy in today as we begin our conversation. And I want to welcome Sharon online. She'll turn on her camera. And while she gets settled, there she is. I just again want to reiterate the flow. Sharon has been just so excited to engage. I'm going to say excited, or willing at least, when I posed that question to her and learning how to do this. And I wanted to name that we were intentional about having Sharon Zoom online so people who were also Zooming had a larger image of her, could access that visual, unlike having a screen in Cana Hall. So we're all kind of seeing the same Zoom box of Sharon or Sharon and I. And hopefully we'll be able to access the questions at the same rate. Arlene will help at the end of that. This is also being recorded, so hopefully we'll send it out to those who weren't able to make it. But Sharon, I have to say, we have the 55 minutes together, and I was going to show off the book. Okay, but there are no books in my office anymore. Every book has been checked out multiple times. Thank you. So there's just like awesome energy around this. I've sent out a description of the book, but I've read it. So I just kind of want to give my understanding of how wonderful you've been and the book. And you've had quite a career path as a journalist, and now, of course, as one of our beloved coworkers in Health Vision's Midwest Fort Wayne. You've done a lot of advocacy work, journalism work. And this book, to me, was published January 3rd, correct?
Yes, it was released on the 3rd, yes.
Okay, it's such a succinct and powerful legacy piece of weaving in your own history intergenerationally, but also you touch on so many relevant topics. You kind of winnow down to your life and go back up into these worldviews. I don't know if there's anything specific you want to do to introduce yourself or the book.
No, I wouldn't say that. Nothing specific. I think you've done a good job of introducing me already.
Hopefully we'll get Sharon here, but this was such a glimpse into kind of the tracing of healing and naming quite a journey, not just you and your family have done. So I'm curious, in your introduction of the book, I said in the promotion of this program, you didn't need to read the book, but I hope people do after. So in the introduction, you talk about your writing process, that you pick it up sometimes, you put it down for a while. What called you to do this and then complete this book?
So when I was a little girl, I was on the couch with my mother it was in the 1980s, and we were watching a newscast. And on the news that day, there was a story about the Ku Klux Klan marching someplace in Indiana. And I looked at her because I was in elementary school. I was in an integrated school and had white classmates, friends, and teachers. And I asked her about this because I couldn't believe that those evil people in the costumes that I saw in the Black History documentaries were still around. And she said, yes, they are indeed. They got daddy. And so there came the title of the book, because those words stuck with me. I didn't know anything about my grandfather. I didn't know anything about this tragic episode of his life and my family's life. All I knew was now, in that moment, that something had happened to him. So in subsequent years, when I grew up and developed a zeal for journalism and research and interviewing folks, this story always remained in the back of my mind. I knew that at some point I would write the story. I saw the story as a calling, but so I would pick up the research part of it and put it down again in terms of, I gathered this much. I've interviewed some of my relatives. I moved a step closer to finding out what happened. And then in recent years, it just became evident that I had enough to go ahead and finish and write the book.
I think many people have read the book, given that my bookshelf is empty from it, but is there a selection of pages you would like to read for us?
Sure, I thought, yes. So I will read, I've chosen 2 scenes that I can read through, if that's okay. And then we can do the Q&A and talk from there. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so for those who have checked it out, which I'm so honored, thank you, Justine, for having me. Thank you, Arlene, and whoever else was involved in setting this up. I do consider it an honor to come before my coworkers and those at PHJC and talk about this, because it has been a heart effort. And so I'm going to read a couple of scenes. And if you have checked out the book, then you've read this scene, if you've even started, because this is the first chapter of the book that I'm going to start with, and then I'm going to do an excerpt from a later chapter. So this is Gone, Just Gone. This is chapter 1. He didn't cozy up to them right away that day. Not likely. Not for 2 strangers who weren't from around these parts. He kept his distance, there on the porch, content to peer at them, to offer his typical greeting for white men. Boss? They were looking for a man called Israel, they told him. Israel Page. I'm going to pause right here because I didn't give any type of a background. And for those who have not read the book, Israel Page is my grandfather. And in the 1950s, there was an incident where he was kidnapped and beaten after a car accident that he'd had with a white sheriff's deputy in Alabama. And so that is the crux of this book. And this opening scene, as you'll see, will lead to that climactic moment. So they were looking for a man called Israel, they told him, Israel Page. Could this have something to do with the court case? The possibility had to enter his mind. It was January 15, 1959, 4.5 years since the accident and the injury, since he could drill a well and bring home a decent paycheck. In some ways, he had recovered. He'd gotten his mind back, his thinking straight, and he could still preach, that's for sure. But he'd lost a lot too. His arm hung limp at his side, useless as a loaf of hoghead cheese. Still, there was a measure of courage to him. That's what it took, courage, for a Negro to go up against a white sheriff's deputy in Alabama over the whole thing. Now, in less than 24 hours, Israel Page would get the trial he'd waited for, and he expected justice to side with him. With all that in mind, compounded by the racial tensions of the day, it's a wonder that he let his guard down at all, that he opened up to those white strangers the way that he did. But indeed, he did. Faith assured him that the Lord lingered near. He trusted God to protect him with the kind of trust that drives out all the fear out of a man, and some might say a little of his common sense too. Whatever the reason, he told the men that if they were looking for Israel Page, they'd found him. You could imagine their relief, since they'd searched all over Browns and Uniontown by then, driving through backcountry roads. They didn't live in this town, they said, and they heard he preached to the Negroes. That's how the conversation started anyway. He told the men about churches nearby, talking easily and for a good while, as he was known to do, and somehow the conversation turned to hunting dogs. He knew everything there was to know about hunting dogs. He had a few good beagles of his own, and he'd let them loose and follow them into the woods to sniff out the scent of easy prey, rabbit, coon, or even squirrel, which his wife, Margaret, turned into dinner. That's when the men told him about a beagle they had. Matter of fact, they said, it was in their car, parked over there by the road. Would he come out and take a look? Now, Margaret might have witnessed all of this if she hadn't been prepping for the next day. She busied herself inside the house, styling her hair with a hot pressing comb, parting it and straightening each section in preparation for their courthouse appearance. The pungent smell of smoked hair filled the woodboard house. Unlike her husband, she would have wanted to get as far away as possible from those visitors. She didn't make small talk with white folks. They grinned to your face in the daylight, then cackled through slits in white sheets come night. She kept on parting and pressing her hair, pressing and parting. It couldn't have been too long before she noticed something wrong, though. The voices outside had stopped. She walked to the front door, but saw nobody there, no one outside in view at all. She stepped onto the porch, then down the steps and into the yard, neck turning, voice calling out the nickname most called her husband, "Preacher?" She walked fast around the yard, scanned the edge of the property, peering across fields, hoping for a glimpse of him. She looked down the road until it curved and disappeared. No preacher. Before long, their latest family car kicked up dirt coming toward the house. Inside, Robert Lee and Willie James, two of the older boys, along with a family friend, were returning from a trip uptown to see what they called a picture show back then. Now they saw the worried look on their mother's face. Had they seen Preacher walking up the road? They told her no. Willie James scoped the surroundings, his sense for detail absorbing the scene as his younger brother Robert Lee stood alongside, slender and tall. No, Daddy wasn't on the road, they said. Hadn't seen anybody driving since they turned off Highway 80 onto the dirt pathway leading home. No preacher? No, ma'am. None of it made sense. Margaret's mind whirled, piecing everything together. On the day before the big trial, men come to the house asking for Preacher, white men. Then all of a sudden he's gone. Not a stitch of him anywhere. And as laid back as he was, Preacher never walked that fast to get anywhere. She and the boys inched to the edge of the red dirt road, looked down the path time and again, satisfying themselves that they hadn't missed something. Could he have turned down one of the side cuts, heading to the house of a friend or a relative? Soon they would enlist neighbors in a search throughout the area. The younger kids still bided time inside the house, but eventually they too would catch on that something wasn't right and everything was wrong. Margaret, a tall, thick woman with a strong back for picking crops, killing chickens, and milking cows, and perhaps an even stronger heart, opened her mouth and called out again and again, "Preacher? Preacher!" That's the end of that chapter. So the next excerpt that I want to read is well into the book. And I didn't want to ruin anything for anyone who hadn't read it. But by this time, just to backtrack, we had the accident. Obviously, my grandfather sued for damages. He was injured in the accident and unable to work as a well driller. You picked up, of course, he was also a preacher and a sharecropper. So the next thing that I'm going to read for those who have the book is on page 110, it begins. And this is a scene after the scene that I just read to you. He lived after the kidnapping, but now he's considering whether or not to move forward with the case because he was threatened, obviously, by the white supremacists, that if he did, he would come to harm or his family would. Although some say that they left him for dead. So this scene is after that, and he's considering what to do next. Various factors played into the final decision, as best we can tell. One of them, perhaps among the strongest, came from a visit with Mr. Coleman Long, a respected businessman who owned the land where the family had lived since they'd left Buck's property. Long came driving up the road sometime after the kidnapping, and his presence put everyone on alert. It was no mystery why he had come. The kidnapping hovered in Brown's Uniontown in Selma, Alabama, where the lawyers had even voted on their resolution for diligence in making arrest, and Granddaddy's story continued to spread. Willie James, my uncle, and likely the rest of the family too, hoped that Long and other whites would stand up for his father against the attackers. If Granddaddy moved forward with the lawsuit, they needed more than big talk and revenge. They needed more than promises of protection from the police. Law enforcement could only do so much, and sometimes they lurked behind the corruption themselves. That much rang true since Brantley Lee, the white deputy in the case, himself wore a badge for many years, but now evaded civil law. Long, a prominent Democrat, property owner, and Uniontown businessman, could give the boost they all needed to pursue justice without fear. Long sat down in a modest area that served as both sitting room and bedroom. All the while, Willie James stood nearby, listening, hoping for a breakthrough, some way that this tragedy could turn around again in the family's favor. He listened, and I'm sure Long expressed his sorrow over the whole thing. But only this part stuck out for Willie James. Long kept explaining why the family should let it go. Regrettably, Long said, some people involved might be high-ranking. Back in those days, it was hard to know who belonged to the Klan or who just saw nothing wrong with conspiring against the Negroes. Long said local law enforcement or business owners or politicians might be involved somehow. This thing would get messy, too messy, if Granddaddy kept it going. I imagine Long chose his words carefully. Willie James, however, summarizes them like this. Now, we could find out who did it, but we're not. Granddaddy took it all in. Long's perspective claimed that the pursuit of justice for Granddaddy would cause more harm than good. Today, it's hard to judge what Long felt inside or how he weighed these circumstances. He fought in World War I and held a reputation for being fair to the local Negroes. In the end, Granddaddy bid him farewell and digested this new reality. Long, and likely many others Granddaddy had talked with uptown, would not become the strong allies he'd hoped for. The dynamic crushed Willie James, just shy of 20 years old back then. I saw at that time that a man was not a man, at least not in the South, Willie James told me a half century later. Growing up, he knew whites deemed Negroes as less than. Still, hearing the conversation with Mr. Long only deepened his doubts about the hearts of white people, even the so-called good ones. They didn't care about us, he explains. They beat a man up. He can't take care of his family, and they don't want to expose the person who did it because it might be somebody important. Frustrations that had built up inside Willie James over the past 4 years bubbled over. The audacity, the cruelty of the events replayed in his mind. The big-time whites, the ones who called his father a good Negro, they couldn't do anything about this. No, they wouldn't do anything about it. Willie James had lived his whole life running up and down country roads, soaking in an atmosphere that called him inferior to white men whose power lay in pushing another man down. That had to end, he told Granddaddy. I'm going up north, he declared later. I want to go where a man is treated like a man. Granddaddy looked at him, likely with a little less hope in his eyes than he'd had before. Certainly since he'd filed this lawsuit when he was certain of victory. He responded in his calm, slow drawl as he spoke to Willie James, words my uncle would forever remember. Son, Granddaddy told him, you gonna be just as Black when you cross that Mason-Dixon line as you is now. Thank you.
Ooh, Sharon.
Mhm.
Those two excerpts were impactful. I don't know if many other people held it in their chest or a ball in their gut listening or reading, which is just to speak to the reality of our community members. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that. So thank you for those two excerpts. For anyone who has not read the book, the whole book is like that, powerful, in a really positively moving way. And it's a relatively short book, but still comprehensive. And you cover so much. You talk about faith and racism, trauma. You talk about Black migration and white flight. You talk about healthcare. There's police brutality. There's so many topics. Is there one you want to explore a little bit more or share a bit more with us today about?
Yes, and that is why I chose those particular excerpts. I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to be an ally. I felt like I wanted to explore that a little bit with this audience. My grandfather, as you may have, determined from the reading, he was this man who was known throughout this rural area, this rural community, as a good Negro. He was a well driller, as I said, before the car accident. And so he had drilled many of the wells for the white community. He worked for a prominent company called Radford and Son Wells. And he'd gone around for years since he was himself a teenager, drilling wells, going uptown, as they called what we call downtown now, going uptown and, speaking and talking to white men. And so there was this surface camaraderie between him and the white community. Although he lived in a segregated area, of course, but he was known by many in the town. And when he filed this lawsuit, this era was the beginning of the civil rights era. In 1954, when he got into the car accident, Brown v. Board of Education had just been passed by the Supreme Court. And so there was this energy in the atmosphere that things might turn around for the Negroes, as they were called during that time. And he was also a pastor, as I've said a couple of times. So there was this faith that he had that God would work some things out here. You know, God could certainly turn things around. And so he did something courageous, something that a good Negro may not have done. And he filed this lawsuit against the white sheriff's deputy, Brantley Lee, after he was not compensated for this lame arm that he now had. The family had to get on welfare. He could no longer support because, of course, my grandmother didn't work outside the home. But at that time, he thought that he had allies. He had, and he did in some ways. The white man that he worked for, Cecil Radford, was the man who took him home after this beating. Okay, he found his way, he made his way to Cecil Radford's house. And Cecil Radford was certainly an ally. But people like Coleman Long, who he had rubbed shoulders with for many years, there was this thinking in the family that these people would stand up for him and that they would fight for the justice that was necessary. But they didn't. And so I wanted to explore the idea of what is an ally for the underserved? What does it mean to not just be a friend and say, hey, I've got some Black friends, or I've got some Latino friends, or I've got some Burmese friends, or I work for a nonprofit and the nonprofit serves the underserved. And in that realm, or in that, I don't want to say under that guise, but those titles give us this feel-good idea of ourselves. But allyship requires sacrifice. That's the idea that I want to put forth. And I want to engage those who are watching, those who are listening in Cana Hall, in terms of when you think of an ally, or when you think of yourself as an ally, why do you think that you are? What about you? What about what you have done indicates allyship for those who are underserved? And so, Justine, I don't want to blow up your Q&A.
I love it.
But I do want to hear from people like, what do you think an ally is?
Great, Sharon. Thank you for setting that question back into an invitation. So people who are in Cana Hall, if you want to write a reflection, do it. If you want to raise your hand, Arlene, please. And if you speak, we ask that you'll say your at least first name. So we can't see you, but at least we can hear you and put a name to that. Or for those online, welcome to put a chat answer, and I will read them out loud for you, name or no name, let me know. Because Sharon, I think this is a really meaty question that we can spend about the next 3 years on, because usually ally is not a self-identified term, right?
Mm-hmm.
That claiming is part of unlearning how we view what an ally is. So I am curious, this will help me in my work too, thank you, Sharon, what people think and feel and are moved into action about. Arlene, is there anyone in Cana Hall?
At this point, no questions.
Uh-oh.
No one's grabbing me.
I
Wait, no,
stumped
I do
them.
have one. I have one.
Okay, great.
Hi, Miss Sharon. Hi, Justine. It's Jessie. And I am donor relations, 5th floor development. And I think not necessarily self-identifying, but people that I would consider being an ally or is being willing to have hard, thought-provoking conversations with people, your friends and acquaintances of other ethnic backgrounds or just other backgrounds in general, underserved, but being willing to be in that uncomfortable space to get to know one another better, and really truly kind of understand where maybe some of those perceptions or traumas are coming from. So it's not just being, the feel good space where you can be like, yeah, I'm here for you, I'm your friend, but being willing to be like, why do you feel that way? What is it that's happened in your experience or maybe the experiences of your family members? Where is that uncomfortableness coming from, and being willing to be uncomfortable yourself to be able to really break those things down.
Thank you.
Thank you. I like that. And the reason that I like that is because you mentioned discomfort, because now I'm sensing that there's some discomfort through the silence in the chat. There's some discomfort here. But the thing about that is, and the point that I was wanting to make with reading that excerpt and asking this question is that I believe that being an ally involves sacrifice. And that's kind of the missing ingredient. I wrote about this in an essay also about sacrifice, but I think that sacrifice and what you were talking about, Jesse, is being willing to be uncomfortable, being willing to look a certain way to your peers and your colleagues, being willing to risk reputation, which Mr. Coleman Long and many of the others in my grandfather's day were not willing to risk. It involves not just saying that I am the director of Health Visions Midwest, a nonprofit that serves the underserved, but what would I be willing to give up for the betterment, for the help improve the lives of those that I serve, or those that I partner with, or those that I stand shoulder to shoulder with? It's not just saying, hey, I want everyone to have health care. I wish that the homeless, I wish that people had health care. I wish everyone, was able to go to the doctor and get the needs that they have met. It's not just saying that. It is, okay, if I have to pay a higher premium so that other people can have health care, that then becomes the allyship. That then becomes the partnership that is needed in order for us as a whole people to rise up. So that's the point that I was trying to get to, is that in my grandfather's situation, as I believe is the case still today, there are many people where we believe that we're standing with, and especially in a nonprofit, we're standing with the people, we're standing with people of color, we're standing with the underserved because of our titles, because of the work that we do during the day that is convenient. But in our personal lives, at home, when it's inconvenient, when our reputations are on the line, are we true allies in that we are willing to sacrifice something of ourselves so that someone else can live a better life?
Hi, there is a couple of comments from the room, and there's also a question in the Q&A. Which would you like me to go to first?
I can do the Q&A, Arlene, thank you. So there is a comment, a huge part of being an ally isn't about necessarily being the helper, but a common interest. So tying yourself to a cause, no matter the outcome, standing by your actions and words and the people you're advocating for. And
Yes.
I'd say advocating with, which I think speaks to that. So I'm glad to hear there are some comments, because really this is a gift of time for us to lean into that discomfort. One of the things I think about allyhood is we're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen, and remaining silent isn't the mistake we need to make. Trying it out and using our courageous voices, leaning into it, could be the right move. So let's hear some other things, Arlene. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Hi Sharon, this is Jess from communications up on 5th floor. And I just wanted to piggyback, I guess, on Jesse's earlier. Mine is very much, I think, the bare minimum ally, if you want to see it that way, is referencing your day-to-day taking action when you see injustices, even if you don't know the person, strangers in your kind of day-to-day life. I think for me personally, that's how I see an ally. A bare minimum ally maybe is this sort of feeling uncomfortable, stranger, you can easily walk away. You can easily not say anything, but taking that approach that this is an injustice and I need to perhaps make myself uncomfortable and right that injustice, or at least speak up. So yeah.
Okay. We got a couple more.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I got 3 in the room right now.
Ooh, great.
Okay.
Hi, Sharon. This is Alicia from Communications.
Yes,
And
Alicia.
hi, I wanted to just first say thank you for today. I always find it to be a pleasure to hear you speak and work with you. But
Thank you.
I didn't feel a discomfort about allyship when I was listening to you. I felt a discomfort in if I was in that time period, if I was in that situation, would I step up? Would I have been an ally? And those are the questions that kind of just keep running through my head of what would I have done? And then I start thinking about today and I go through my busy life and I'm sure that I have missed it. I'm sure that I have missed that undertone of racism for somebody next to me and I didn't do anything or I didn't see it. And I feel like that's where I'm a terrible ally because I'm not looking for it or I'm not seeing it or I'm just so busy that all I care about is getting my 4-year-old strapped into that car seat so I can leave and I missed something that I should have commented on or stood up for. So, Sari's on it. But I don't know what I'm trying to say other than I'm trying.
And that's good. I mean, like Justine said, nobody's perfect, nothing, there are things that I miss as an African American that I think back, oh man, I should have said something. I should have spoke up. And so, or I should have made myself available to be informing. Sometimes it's like, there's somebody has a question, I don't feel like answering it. I got to go. I don't have time for this. So Alicia, this is not, I'm certainly not wanting to create an atmosphere where people are beating themselves up or saying, I miss it. Oh, I appreciate the mere fact that you have a heart to want to not miss it. And I think that's good. And I think that's where we all need to be.
Awesome. Awesome. Here we go.
I'm Susie Black. I'm one of the directors at the center at Donaldson. I'm 69 years old. I was born in 1954. So what you were reading resonates with me. I've always lived in Indiana. In 1972, my senior year in high school, my dad was one of the highest selling real estate brokers in Kokomo, Indiana, which happened to be the headquarters of the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in 1972. And we had a black judge, Judge Grimes. My dad was a developer for a big asphalt and paving company and put in subdivisions and sold lots for people to build on. Judge Grimes called him, wanted to buy a lot. There were no other black people living in that subdivision. Dad had him come to our house and he and his wife came and they looked over all the lots and Dad showed him what he thought was probably the best lot in the new section of the subdivision, which was a corner lot, real premier lot. Now remember, 1972 was a long time ago. The lot was $10,000. And Judge Grime was like, yeah, that sounds good. Bought the lot and wrote a check for it. And we were full speed ahead helping him. Dad was helping him find a builder. And we started getting phone calls. And Dad's phone, of course, pre-cell phone, so landline, ringing into the house with threats to my dad and to our family for selling a lot to a Black man in this subdivision and saying things like, you know, you'll never sell another lot. You'll this, you'll that. And Dad argued with people, stood his ground, said, you know, that doesn't matter. We're not changing the outcome. This is Judge Grimes's lot, and he's going to build in this subdivision. Then people started threatening our family. Me, you know, I know your daughter's a senior in high school. I know that she comes home at 5 o'clock. I mean, literally tracking us. And my dad had a family meeting with my mom and I. My brother was away at college, talked to us openly about it. And he said, the right thing for us to do is to stand our ground, but it puts all of us in jeopardy. But I just want you to know, I don't think there's any way, shape, or form this should change the outcome. We're going to help Judge Grimes find a builder. And he's, you know, Dad was like, I don't want you to go anywhere alone, Susie. You should always have someone with you. You know, I mean, literally lived like that for about 4 months. Judge Grimes comes to our house, says, Bill, I'm not going to do this. I'm getting threats. I know you are. And Dad said, that's beside the point. I will stand in this breach because it's the right thing to do. And Judge Grimes said, no, I want you to sell the lot for me. He said, it's just more than my wife and I want to do. We just are going to sell the lot. And I was there. I heard Dad trying to talk him out of it. Like, you know, but no, do this. You know, there are a lot of fine people do this. It'll go. And Judge Grimes was like, no, it won't go away. And I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to put my wife and I in that position. And I don't want to put you in that position. So my dad sold the lot for $4,000 more than Judge Grimes paid for it and gave it back to Judge Grimes and said, I convinced the people that bought it that it was a corner lot and that was worth more than the other lots. But it at that moment in my life, 18 years old, he was an ally and he was going to stay an ally. And it impressed on me what that meant. Now, to the same point as Alicia said, life happens and you get unaware of what you're unaware of. And I would like to think that in the right situation, I'm an ally, but in the day-to-day situation, I don't know that I pick up on where I need to be an ally. I don't know that. I hope I do. I hope I'm sensitive to that. But getting to know Arlene and working with Arlene, I've had a raised awareness about things living here in Marshall County and having her as a friend that I probably overlooked or wouldn't have known about if we hadn't have had our heart-to-heart conversations. So I would like to think in the right scenario, I am an ally. I know I was born and bred to be one, but I would definitely like to think that this raises my awareness. And by the way, while you were reading, I went on Amazon and bought your book.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And I just want to thank you for that. And since the book has come out, I've had a number of people talk about growing up in homes where their families were allies and in families that were racist, and how the difficulties there. I've talked with people about sundown towns and all of those things. I did want to interject here and say that in researching the book, one of the things that I found was how big of an ally the Catholic Church was to people of color. My grandfather, after the car accident, went to, or he was said to have gone to a Black hospital. And so I began to look up that hospital name, the Burwell Infirmary, and it was part of what was called the Black Hospital Movement. And the Catholic Church was very involved in the Black hospital movement in terms of making or allowing their establishing hospitals where Black people could be treated and where Black doctors and nurses could practice. So as you can imagine, even the hospitals were segregated, and many of them would not accept Black patients, or they put them in the basement, and they certainly weren't allowing Black doctors and nurses to practice. But during the Black hospital movement, the Catholic Church was one of those institutions that made that possible. And so I, held my head up a little higher in terms of working under the poor handmaids of Jesus Christ. I know there may be some other people in the room. I did want to go back to Justine and say, I am sorry, we're supposed to go by this format and platform here. And I didn't know if you wanted to return to one of the questions that you had for me.
Thank you. Arlene, hopefully if people do have definitions of allies, they can write them down on the pieces of paper, or people can put in the chat so we can continue this conversation. It sounds like there's a hunger to learn about everyday bystander engagement, ally development, advocacy, because really it is about the art of showing up. And it's about showing up past Black History Month, about showing up past the cool parts of a culture and doing some of that hard internal growth and external action. And I had 2 more questions for Sharon, but in the time we have left, if there are questions from our coworkers, sisters, and community members, I want to honor their voices as well. So I would say if we have 2 questions and then we'll do a check-in. Arlene, is there anyone who has a specific question for Sharon about her process or her book? And also the same is true for the Q&A on Zoom, if you have a specific question about the book, and then we'll move from there.
Okay, I have a hand here in the room about the book.
Okay.
I just want to say I have
Sharon,
read the
we should
book,
have done
and it's a very, very well written, and I recommended it to others, and it's made me aware of things that I wasn't aware of before, some of the certain things. And especially, I wanted to say how thankful I was for the what you say in the very first part. Maybe it's before the first chapter. I'm not sure, but it's about the things that get in the DNA from these terrible happenings, and that are just can't be erased, and that in the Black culture that are. It helped me to understand and explain things that exist today, and the things that are so painful, or that are secretive, or are just things that arise out of self-protection, families and so forth. Those things that are there, they help me to understand some things in Black culture today, and I appreciate that. So I wanted to let you know how what you said at the beginning of the book, and I certainly recommend it. It's very good, and I remember what you said about Martinsville, and oh my gosh, things that as a little kid I just didn't realize when we would go to Martinsville. So.
Thank you so much. I didn't get the name of who that was because I can't see anybody.
That was Elsa. She's a Maria Center resident.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elsa.
You want to go ahead with your questions, Justine?
Yeah. Part of that is talking about epigenetics. So research fields that talks about how the environment you're raised in influences and in fact affects your genes. So conversations I'm involved in are a lot about trauma, but it's also releasing that trauma that can transfer through DNA. And you talk about this a lot. So you're talking about the realities of racism, including trauma, but also celebrating Black joy and celebrating it. How do you balance the good and the bad, as in the growth parts, the good and the bad?
So that is a large part of the point that I was making in the book, is how the things that have happened in the past, how they affect future generations. And I believe that that's what happened with my grandfather. It was such a traumatic event for him and his children. And those types of traumatic events can affect how, I don't want to say the wrong thing with epigenetics and all of that, but they can be passed down through our genes, through our DNA. And how we express and behave, those environmental factors, how we express ourselves and how we behave and react to trauma, or especially racial trauma. And it's called cultural trauma when an entire group of people is affected. And so this was something that was not talked about in our family much. And that's why the research and the investigation was important for me to do later on. And, you know, they had erased a lot of the details of what happened, but not the bitterness and the pain and hurt that it caused, and their perception of white America and America in general. And so we were a people, or are a family of faith. And so one of the ways that we balanced this was always to think about, okay, there will always be evil in the world, but there's still a God that we look to for hope, and that we look to for a brighter future. And so that's how our family balanced that with our faith. And we would have family reunions every year. Our family was pretty tight-knit in that respect. And so we would have family reunions, we would come together, we would laugh, we would talk, we would tell the fun stories we heard about. And we would tell those stories, we would eat, and we would grow together. And in our family and in our thinking and in our mind, we're in this together. And so in some ways, the trauma can actually bring a people closer together. And so we looked at this with an eye of faith and with the eyes of family bonding.
Thanks, Sharon. To honor everyone's time, I'm going to move to the last question. And this is funny that we already spoke about silence, because that's where I kind of want to leave a lingering message. So in the introduction, you quote author and birth doula Jacqueline Clements, and say, "It's the silence that hurts us."
Right.
So a couple of things. Thank you for breaking the silence and writing this book. It's quite a legacy. And also you've invited us to name what ally means in practice, in action, including speaking up and speaking out. So is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
Another thing that I have found has been so important, especially with me in the writing of this book, I have said in various interviews that I found healing in the writing. So there were things that I went through as an African-American woman, growing up as a girl, all of those microaggressions that you've heard about. I lived some of those things, the fear, the sense of inferiority with some of my white classmates, those things I lived through, but I did not process them. I didn't analyze them until I began to look into my family's history. Until I began to look into what happened to my grandfather. And then I found out so many other things, and interviewing my uncles and aunts and my mother and grandmother before she passed away. My last word of wisdom is for each of you to look into, if you haven't done so, your history, your family history, to talk to those of the generation before you, to ask them, some tough questions about race, or about, some of the things that they endured in their lives, things that they're not going to talk about at the family reunion or when they come together for a holiday, things that might take some time. I had to set aside some hours to talk to some of my uncles and aunts, because once you get them going about the old days, they get going. But I'm telling you, once I began to talk to them about how life was as they knew it, as they were growing up, I began to understand so much more of me. And I began to heal from pains and issues that I didn't know that I needed to heal from. As I was writing this, I would be typing and writing and scenarios would come up and I was like, why am I thinking about this? Oh my, and I began to find healing in the context of the greater history of who I am by looking back at my ancestors and finding out who they were. So I encourage everyone to do that, to think about and talk about even some of the tough scenarios that you experienced and that your family members experienced, and to give yourself grace in that process of learning, to learn more about them, to learn more about you, and to realize, hey, I'm part of something much bigger than myself.
Absolutely. It sounds like we've now created some 12 ideas for more programs through the year because we will continuously learn and grow. But I just want to say thank you so much, Sharon. This was a gift. I knew it would be. I think it's been a gift for everyone to hear you put some life into that book, and then also take our questions and our definitions of allyhood. So I wanted to say thank you. I also do want to say thank you to Alicia and Jess, who helped do the tech, and Arlene, who helped MC, with a shout out to Brooke as well, helping set up tech. I am learning in this. So thank you all. If before you leave either the Zoom call or Cana Hall, we'd love to hear from you. What was impactful for you about this hour? So you can write it down on a piece of paper if you're in Cana Hall, or put it in the chat or Q&A, because this is a growing space for us all, and treating each other with a bit of grace as we learn too. So thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's claps all around, claps all around. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
God bless.
Everyone.
Mhm.